I have doubts. I have great insecurity
I think we
about the
would call that
performance
a
of my light.
misuse of the phrase anyway. So,
Yeah, that's the truth. We'll turn it on eventually. When I feel like I have a really good idea, I'll flip the light on. Bing.
I have a new light, this gigantic
Yeah.
softbox thing,
Yep.
courtesy the advice of Gus Simpson, our friend, who
Okay.
is responsible for many things that help AMOS
Yeah.
sound better and look better.
Yeah. Brent's feeling good, looking good, should I say, with this new big soft light source. Before he had like the light of his monitor lighting his face up
Oh
and
yeah,
stuff.
no, I had an old laptop and my iPad, and I just put pure white images on it and cranked the brightness. It was passable, but not ideal.
Not ideal. All right, everybody. Let's see here. We're gonna start. We're gonna start by talking about our next Q&A. So our next Q&A is going to be January 10th. What day of the week is that, Brent? Is that a Tuesday? Wednesday?
You're asking questions I'm not prepared to answer. It is a Wednesday.
It's a Wednesday night. That Q&A is going to be hosted by L. Grover Fricks. So January's Q&A is L. I'm going to be there to introduce her, and I'm going to introduce her even now before next month gets here, because for those of you that aren't caught up in listening to the podcast in real time, L. So we get to season 6, and we should have done it a long time before this. But eventually we get to season 6, and somewhere towards the beginning, middle of season 6, we expand the teaching team. We add additional voices. For those of you that are caught up, you know this. You've met L. Grover Fricks. She is a huge crowd favorite. She is an expert in Hebrew. She loves to bring the perspective of women in the text. She had a focus in academia of violence done to women in the scriptures. So her perspective is just really beautiful. We also introduced Reed Dent to the I almost said introduced Reed Dent to the text, which sometimes I feel like that's exactly what we're doing with Reed. But Reed will be on eventually. We also have Josh Basse. He's another one of our teachers. So the Bema teaching team has expanded to 5 of us: Marty, Brent, L, Reed, and Josh. And eventually you're going to see all of them in these spaces too. But for all of you that are early in the podcast who haven't gotten to season 6, you have not met them. And so it's going to be really weird if you're early and you've never met them. Like, who is this? Who is L? Who is Josh? And so we're gonna introduce them. We're gonna just introduce L in January, and you'll love her. Everybody loves her. She's great. And we're also working on a project over the course of this next year. I don't know when it will launch, but we are going to be recreating seasons 1 through 5, session 1 through 5, the main body of work. And there's a lot of reasons that we're doing that. Some of them trivial, like we just need to update stuff, and I got things wrong 6 years ago, and I need to make them right. But other reasons is because we want to work that team, all those teachers, we want to work them into the content earlier, so that they're earlier in your Bema journey. And so we're going to be relaunching sessions 1 through 5 with the whole team. And that will be beautiful and wonderful. And that will help solve this problem of people not knowing who Josh and Reed and Elle are. So it's good. It's a great move. Bema needs to be bigger than Brent and Marty. So far, we still call it the Bema Podcast with Marty Solomon. That's what the logo says. Maybe someday we'll even change that. But for now, I guess it's my namesake still on the front. But oh well.
It is your
Brent, is there
fault.
anything?
We're all here.
It is. I will take the blame for that for a little bit longer. Anything else you would add to that, Brent, about Elle in January?
Well, she was in your original Bema class in Pullman in Washington State University. And then I was on the same Israel trip that she went
Yep.
on in 2016. And then
Yep.
she went on to study in Jerusalem after that. So
Yeah.
Um, you know,
Yeah.
she's
The student has literally become the teacher. She's one that teaches me Hebrew. I take my Hebrew. She's my accredited teacher. Not that I'm taking it for credit, but she has her degree and her master's in biblical Hebrew, and she teaches me my. It's really cool to have had somebody who was a student before Bema was a podcast, when it was just a class for college students, and then to watch her. I live vicariously through her career, because she went on to get far more degrees and far more education than me, and now she's running way up ahead of where I'm at, and yeah, that's been a fun journey, really really fun, and really fulfilling as a teacher to see that and to experience that, even if it pokes at my insecurities sometimes, because that's real. I'm a real human being.
well,
Let's see
a lot
here.
of love for Elle in the comments, and I think everyone
Good.
who doesn't yet know her will find that she's an incredible teaching voice. And part of the reason that we're getting her into these Q&As, and hopefully getting the other teachers at some point as well, is that each person has different focuses, different things that they're better at considering or answering or have expertise in or whatever. So we actually already have a list of questions that we've held for each of the other teachers. And so Elle's just the first one who's going to have a chance to get on and answer some of these. I think the oldest one is dating back to May. So like we've we've been working on getting them into this workflow for a little while. But yeah, we're excited to address some of those questions.
Yeah, anything that was of the Hebrew, anything that really delved into Hebrew language, I saved for L. Anything that at all wanted to talk about women, or where there was a chance that I would end up mansplaining some stupid theological thing, I just kicked that over to L's document, and we'll let her speak to those things more appropriately. And speaking of questions and speaking of comments, you said the comments were full of love for L. Just so you guys know, like that, we have found some really cool new systems. I really like how the communication flow. I don't know how you feel, Brent, but the new communication flow with email and the way we're moving and shaping, um, just how we receive communication has gotten so much better. But the load of questions is enormous. And just so you guys know, we're not getting to all the questions that get submitted. We're trying to identify the ones that we really can speak to, want to speak to, and as many as we can. But just know that we're never going to get to uh, be able to get to everybody's live comment or everybody's emailed question. Um, some questions will always be set aside and stuff for people like Elle or Josh or Reed, when I feel like they would have a lot of fun with a question. So it may take a while for you to have a question, and it may never even make it to the document. So just wanted to speak to that and say we love all those messages. Somebody sees them all. Somebody reads all those messages. So nothing's just going to a trash can. Somebody on the team sees it. They mean something to us. We're very appreciative of that, and that's awesome.
Yeah,
Anything you would add to that, Brent, before I dive in?
last month we had a dozen questions in our document that we never even got to, that we thought that we would get to, and we had another probably 15 questions on top of that from the live chat that fell off the back of the truck. And it's just I think that's just the reality going forward, is that we can't actually get to everything. So we do what we can, but we'd rather sit on a question for a little bit longer and give it the attention that's appropriate than try to give a quick pat answer to everything and then just move on just to check off boxes.
So true. And I do. So my goal tonight, is to really get caught up. I've got a master list. I think I'm going to be able to get through it. That's my goal. I might move a little quickly, but my goal is to kind of get caught up on our parking lot. We call it our parking lot today. And that's what I hope to do tonight, because if we can get caught up on the stream of questions, we're going to start to shape these live streams in some really cool ways. Like, we have some cool ideas. It's not going to happen all at once, but we're going to slowly start to shape these discussions and be able to really highlight and focus some talking points and some questions that we want to dig really deep on. And just the whole nature of what we're doing in these live stream spaces is going to keep getting better. I'm very, very excited about it. So that's what I think about that. So with no further ado, no further ado,
I do.
unless Brent wants to stop me, I'm going
Well,
to jump right in.
Yeah, are we taking any live questions tonight, or are we just
Do you
trying
have
to get through the
anything right
deck?
off the bat that's just like anything that's just right, boom, right in front of you?
Michael just left a comment, wants to know a suggestion for a good commentary set.
Ugh. Great question, Michael. That expression had nothing to do with you. I just don't. I don't love commentaries. I love a good study Bible. I love Robert Alter's translation of Tanakh and the footnotes. I have about 5 or 6 different study Bibles whose footnotes and all those things are just so helpful. I have a newer version of the JPS, Jewish Publication Society. That's where I love to go. I am not a huge fan of commentaries, so I don't have any to recommend. Doesn't mean there aren't good ones out there. There's some great Jewish commentaries too, really, really good ones. And if you had a whole bunch of money you wanted to drop on the Encyclopedia Judaica, I mean, that would be a ton of fun. But yeah, I don't have a great. It's a good question. It's just not my style. The internet has changed that for a lot of us. I feel like that used to have more of a place maybe, and than it maybe occupies today. So,
Yeah,
give me one more live
Je-
one, Brent.
well, Jeff makes a note. The preface of Alter's translation alone is about worth the price, and I would totally agree with that.
It's true, and then you can get some of the books that go alongside of that and everything else. So, all right, Brent's going to interrupt me kind
Uh,
of along the way with live questions and different things that come up as we go through. So we're going to get better and better at that. But I think I'm gonna jump in here. I have a goal. I want to meet it. I'm determined this evening. So here we go. Here's my bright ideas. Bam. Let there be light. And there was. And it was good. All right. Steve sent us a question. He said, I am in session 4 in Revelation. I was surprised not to hear any conversation regarding why the tribe of Dan is not mentioned among the list of 144,000. Any thoughts on that? Um, I'm surprised you didn't hear it either, because I'm pretty sure we talked about it somewhere. I thought it was back in the Judges episode. Brian went back and listened, and he says there was a couple passing comments, but nothing in depth. Like I didn't do something in depth here. What I pointed out, and I thought it was in dropping the jawbone when we talked about Samson. So we talk about Samson, and he has, I mean, towards the end of that story, we're looking at the Danites. And the Danites are supposed to occupy this land. They have a role to play just to the north of Judah, is the land that they're kind of the northwest of Judah, towards they're supposed to be right on the edge of the Philistines, is essentially the land that they occupy. I take all of our groups in Israel, I take them over, and we look at where the tribe of Dan, you can see where the tribe of Dan settled. It's one ridge. There's one ridge line where we're told the tribe of Dan lived from in between Zorah and Eshtaol. And you can see, as you look at this one singular ridge, Zorah on one end and Eshtaol just around kind of a dog leg on the same ridge. And so the whole tribe of Dan fits on that one ridge. And that's where they're supposed to live. And we're told at the end of the book of Judges that they leave and they go all the way up north. All the way up north. They forsake the call that God put on the tribe, and they go all the way up north to where Tel Dan is today. You can go to Israel and go to Tel Dan, and it's gorgeous, like waterfalls. Brent, can you remember? Did you go on any of the trips that you've been on to Tel Dan, or have you yet to make it to Tel Dan?
I did go to Tel Dan on the 2022 low contact trip.
And can you remember just the water and the just gorgeous, right?
Yeah, it was, I mean, just coming off of Mount Hermon, you have just all this, and especially at the time we went when they had like the most rainfall they'd had in 30 some years.
Yeah.
It was just lush, beautiful, this incredible river going through where it's like, this
Yeah.
doesn't feel like Israel.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can tell when you go there, you can tell like why Dan would have said, this is where we want to be. So they forsake what God asked them to do. They go to where they want to go. And historically speaking, because they go all the way up to the north, Dan is going to be pummeled by every single army that comes in from the north. Assyria, Babylon, everybody that wants to come in has to come right through where Tel Dan will end up being, and they will just like literally just kind of be pummeled out of existence. And so by the time you get to Revelation, Dan is missing, and that also appears in Jewish rabbinic conversation. There's a rabbinic lesson in there, the rabbis say, that if you forsake the call, if you say, I don't really want to do what God asked me to do, I want to do something else. I want to do something else that God, you know, something other than what God has asked me to do. Well, you'll end up just losing your whole spot in the story. So at some point, we made some passing comments to that and the fact that they're no longer in the book of Revelation. And that's why. So I think when we were actually going through Revelation, it would have been a deterrent from the larger conversation. I really don't like to muddy the waters and pull us into the weeds. And so I probably didn't get into that in Revelation, but I know it's a teaching point. It's at least a teaching point for me when I'm over in Israel. And I thought we did it somewhere along the journey. But I'm sure, Steve, that you didn't skip ahead. I'm sure that you did. You listened to the session 2, right, Steve? Okay.
Probably.
Woe to those who skip session 2.
Even today, like as we were going up to that area, our Jewish guide on the trip was pointing out like, oh, here's, that ridge line there is where Lebanon has rockets, and here's our thing over here that like protects us from that. And like it's
Yep.
not really much of a better place to be today than it was for Dan.
No, it's not. It's not. And even right now, yep, that's all the commentary I'll add to that. But yes, you are absolutely correct. Brent is very well spoken on that point. All right, Christine had a question. She says, I just finished listening to episode 219 with my wife, titled Loving the Adventure. I have really enjoyed all the episodes up to this point, but this one made me slightly uncomfortable, mostly because of what was said at the end about women being a part of man and her desire for her husband. I believe that's in the Bible, and it's even what the Bible teaches, but I have never really wanted to be married. Makes me feel like I might be a tad bit weird because I have never wanted a husband, really. Actually, at this point in my life, the idea of physical intimacy between a husband and wife is really terrifying to me and actually repels me, which is the main reason that I feel like it would be wrong for me to be married. Also, I like being single. And as I get older, I realize I never had the desire for marriage even as a child. This made church slightly uncomfortable for me because I felt like church was teaching that one of the main responsibilities or roles of a woman was to be a wife and a mother. And if I never got married, I would never be either of those things. So my question is, if God made woman to prop a man up and man to prop woman up, and I never got married, does that mean that I will be incomplete in some way without a husband? I don't know if that's what you and Becky meant in that episode, but I felt like that was an underlying part of your message, even if it was unintentional. So can I be a complete person without a husband? Really, really appreciate this question. I have also sent it over to Elle for January. So again, one of these questions where if I can get a woman's voice in here, I want that in here too. Let me say, without a doubt, unequivocally, that word, unequivocally, whatever the word is, without a shadow of a doubt, that I am completely aligned with what you're communicating here. That the church does a horrible job creating place for those who are single. In similar ways to, we have some awkward spaces for those who have gone through divorce and different stigmas that they have to deal with in the church. So we do a very poor job at that. I think in that episode, I know in the second episode for sure, but I'm usually very conscious of that. And I think my wife and I made a very deliberate and intentional point of mentioning, like, this is just who we are. There's plenty of space for other people in the conversation, because we never want to give what you ended up hearing. That's never our intention. That's the kind of life that we have. That's the kind of life that we enjoy. But there's space. How do you actually phrase it here? Can I be a complete person without a husband? 110%. In fact, the New Testament will say things about marriage actually makes some things even more complicated. So there's absolutely a space for singleness. But here's the point that I would even bring up about Genesis and what we were saying. We assume marriage in the Genesis metaphor. But the Genesis metaphor is not talking primarily about the marriage relationship. Genesis is about human origins. The point of Genesis, the point of the plank, the point of etzer kenegdo, is not just about husband and wife. We presume that. We project that onto the conversation. It's not just about husband and wife. It's about male and female. It's not just in a marriage relationship. It's all of humanity. All of humanity, married, single, widowed, divorced, any situation you could find yourself in. Humanity is the combination, it's the culmination of diversity. It's male and female together. It's not just in the marriage relationship. We obviously see it very prominently in the marriage relationship. That's one of the places where it's maybe the easiest to identify it and experience it and talk about it as a case study. But the truth is far larger than that and far bigger than that. Those two planks that the rabbis talk about that lean up on each other. I remember one day in a staff meeting at church, they started talking about whether or not we were going to move to gender-specific small groups. Like we think we should just go to all men small groups and all women small groups. And I don't lose my mind in staff meetings very often. And I remember they made fun of me for years because I lost my mind that day in staff meeting. Because I said, I cannot follow Jesus in all of these gender-specific spaces because I need the perspective, I need the personality, I need everything that the feminine side of the body of Christ brings to the table. They have to be involved in my life. They have to be involved in the conversation. Their voice has to be present. You see, male and female is not just about husband and wife. We make Genesis about marriage. Genesis is bigger than marriage. Genesis is bigger than marriage, and it applies to marriage. But the truth of Genesis, male and female, is not just husband and wife. It's that men and women they are the help that opposes. I need the female presence in my life, or I will never be everything that God wants me to be. Beyond my wife, I just need women in the body of Christ to help all of us be everything that we're supposed to be. They're supposed to oppose us. Like they're supposed to help us by opposing us. It's that supporting help that we talked about. And so that is not just a husband-wife image. That is I think I already said the name, Christine. You, Christine, have a role to play because of who you are in the body of Christ, and everything in that metaphor applies to you. Applies to you in your singleness. So, very passionate about that. Very frustrated with myself that the way that we presented that gave you that impression. So I will say, for all the ways that was my fault, I am sorry, because I did not mean to continue to prop up that idea. And I know that a lot of that is just we've heard it so much, we assume it, we project it. Like I thought I gave a passing comment to that in the episode. Maybe I did, and maybe I didn't, and it's still not enough. Like we still have to be so aware of that and work really hard at trying to figure out how we counter just so many narratives that have gone one direction, and a passing comment isn't enough to correct that. So, and I may have not given that comment until the next episode with Becky. I'm not sure, but deeply, deeply appreciate your perspective. And if that is what I communicated, that is not what I should have communicated or what I intended to communicate. And my intent doesn't matter. So I will just say I'm sorry for that, because intent is not justification. All right, going to keep going. But Elle will come back. That's not the last time we're going to hear that question. Elle is going to come back to that question in January, I hope. Okay. There's this. Let's see here from Aaron. I just listened to episode 238 on Jewish roots. In that, Marty and Brent were talking about how Gentiles might be offending Jews by doing the Jewish things. Speaking of appropriation is the idea there. I have no Jews in my community, so according to what was said in the episode, I should not do the Jewish things, but I could if there were Jews here and I was doing it with them. And it's not just that you would do it with them, it's that they would invite you. It's that you would be invited into a space, or you would be invited into a cultural space where people are saying, here, come as a guest. and we could be good guests. It's not about necessarily our rights, or as long as I'm with somebody, then I can do it. Or it's that we realize that we're, to put it in Paul's language in Romans, if you're a Gentile, that the Gentile realizes they're grafted into the tree. They're not the tree. They're not the owner of the tree. They've been grafted in. And to always remember that space, Paul says, that they occupy in God's larger kind of covenant family. So it's not just doing it with them. It's that you're invited by them into that space. But since there are no Jews here, and I'm of the understanding that I'm grafted in, there you go, just like the Egyptians were who left with the Israelites, even though I'm still a Gentile. Therefore, I believe that the instruction to keep kosher and keep the feasts are still things that I should follow. I do not want to offend my Jewish brothers, and I'm not trying to be Jewish. I'm only trying to follow what God has asked of me. And I'm not trying to create an argument. I'm only trying to learn from those more studied than I. And you're welcome to see it that way, Aaron. Just because I teach something or see it a particular way doesn't mean that you have to agree with me or that you're right. The Bema perspective is one that we went over for this particular idea in Galatians. We went over Galatians verse by verse. We talked about this idea really in depth. I am of the persuasion, and I follow a school of scholarship that believes that what Paul is saying is that Gentiles, ethnic Gentiles, should not be Torah observant. That if you're an ethnic Gentile, that you are, in Paul's words, this would be my paraphrase. You're ruining the gospel. That the gospel is supposed to be incarnated by the Gentile freedom and the Jewish covenant being of one body. That those distinctions are present in the same community, and that's what makes the gospel the gospel. Lots of people agree. There's lots of messianic perspectives that disagree with that reading, but I am of the persuasion of new perspective on Paul's scholarship, Paul within Judaism, and I think Paul's very adamant about that point. And listening to Jews today, I agree. And it doesn't matter that there's not Jews like in your community or around you. You never know. You never know if there are. You're not aware that they're there, but a lot of Jews don't live in an observant way that you would even be able to recognize those things if they're not in an Orthodox community. Like, you could have Jews around you and they might move in next week. And so then would you change what you were doing? So this reasoning has to be somewhat thoroughly thought through. Part of what matters the most to me is listening to our Orthodox Jewish brothers and sisters talk about how for some, the extreme language is offensive. Confusing might be softer language. And then paired with New Testament scholarship, that's just my perspective. I think that's what the New Testament is trying to tell us, plead with us. That's the gospel. Gentiles being Gentiles, Jews being Jew, and then both Jew and Gentile finding their place within the Jesus community. So that's just how I would read it. And that's how I would encourage it. But Brent, I see you here. Brent has arrived.
Adam has a follow-up question. Paul was telling them not to be Jewish because of their reason for wanting to be Jewish, though, right? Not simply because of appropriation. He's referring to Galatians.
Well, I would say neither. So Paul's not dealing with the 21st century cultural problems of appropriation that have emerged over the course of 2,000 years. It's a good follow-up. But nor is, and I think a lot of Messianic thinking would agree with you. I think they would say, yes, Paul's talking about the reasoning, but as long as that's not your reasoning, you could still do it. I fundamentally disagree. I think Paul's argument is squarely on. I mean, he confronts Peter about, it's all about presenting the gospel. It's about what the world sees. It's not internal, it's external. The reason that Paul's so fired up is not that what they want in their desires of their hearts. Paul's fired up because what it does, the world is supposed to see Jew and Gentile together. So when Gentiles become Jews or live the same way as Jews, then the gospel loses it loses all of its potency. They're supposed to be living in the presence of Shammai Judaism, Shammai country. And of course, if you're not in session 4, then we're way ahead of ourselves, okay? So we do this verse by verse. We do a deep dive into Thomas Lancaster, who's a Messianic scholar, who at the end of the day would still disagree with what I'm saying right now. But for 17 of his 21 chapters of his book was just so dynamite for a new perspective on Paul. I think Thomas Lancaster would actually agree with the follow-up question there. I don't. I fundamentally disagree, and I follow scholars that also would land there. But doesn't mean I'm right. Doesn't mean I'm right. But I think this comes up all throughout your New Testament. And I think Paul's position on this doesn't change. What is so powerful about the gospel, and this is bigger than the Jew-Gentile thing, but guys, what's supposed to be so powerful about the gospel is unity, not uniformity. We're not all supposed to be, the power of the gospel is that we bring diversity. We bring different ways of doing things. We bring different identities, and we come to the same Eucharist table and we say, me too in Christ. That's the testimony of the gospel. Not that we all get on the same page and do everything the same way. And this is Paul's argument all throughout his New Testament letters, is the power of the gospel is in our ability to coexist, and not just coexist in a tolerance, but we actually build fellowship, the right hand of fellowship. And we give that away to people of different social class and status and different genders and different, we share this common fellowship. And that is what the gospel looks like incarnated. And so when you remove that diversity, when you remove those distinctions, what I hear Paul saying is you remove the power of the gospel to tell the world that this is what Jesus has done. There is no Jew or Greek, slave nor free, male or female. Were there still male and female? Of course there were. Were there still men and women? Yes. Were there still slaves on Wednesday morning when they got up? Yes, there were still slaves and slave owners. There were still men and women. There were still Jews and Greek. The distinction remained, but the unity in Christ is what presented the gospel to the world. And so being okay with who we are, if I'm a Gentile, be a Gentile, and realize that my full accepted identity is in my Gentile freedom. If I'm a Jew, lean into that covenant, knowing that my identity is in the belovedness of God experienced in covenant. So that would be my take. Doesn't mean I have to be right about those things. I feel like I'm not square in the box. Brent, let me scoot over. All right, there we go. I'm square. Now we go.
I need to figure out a way to adjust that without messing up the other view, and I haven't had a chance to do that yet. But a couple other follow-up items. Elisa says she just finished session 2, and you did talk about Dan forsaking God's call.
Okay.
Hooray. So, check. And then a couple other questions following up on the previous question about being complete with or without a spouse. Dylan was to know, doesn't the Genesis union get projected onto marriage because of statements by Paul in his letters?
Well, I'd have to think about which statements of Paul could be referencing. I thought they were going to say the statements of Jesus, because Jesus will hearken back to Genesis when he speaks about divorce. And just because, again, I think the principle is what's being, like when Jesus harkens back to Genesis, I don't think he's hearkening back to some Genesis marital covenant. I think he's hearkening back to a principle about how women, like this whole conversation about divorce, devalues women, but women are the other half of mankind, humankind. Like women, that's why you can't treat them that way in divorce. Not because of a marital teaching, but because they're full-fledged members of the human race. So you don't get to send them away. You don't get to discard them. Now, I think Paul's going to be doing similar things. I think it largely it's going to depend on which passage we're talking about and what's being referenced and those kind of things. Again, does the Genesis teaching have relevance to marriage? 110%. It's almost like hyper, not focused. I don't know what I'm trying to say, but it's like such a dense realization of the truth of Genesis in the marriage context, but it's also so much bigger than the marriage context. So I think that's why it gets called out and leaned upon in all those conversations about marriage, because that is ultimately what we're dealing with in the marriage experience as well. Do I value this person as fully human? Do I value them as the other side of the conversation? And
Doreen
just to
points out,
go ahead.
Doreen points out a great example of it being more than marriage is how Elle moved on and has been able to teach things to you in return.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. 110%. Yep. Yep. There's a big, huge principle. It's like a Venn diagram. It's like marriage will definitely fall completely under the umbrella of this Genesis meta principle, but that umbrella also covers lots of things outside the marriage, um, outside the marital context and the marital reality. So 100%. And just to go back, I feel like I didn't wrap up my thoughts on Aaron's question too. At one point, Aaron, you say, "I'm not trying to be Jewish," and I don't want to be argumentative, Aaron. That's not my point. Again, let me say a million times. You can see this differently. Lots of other people do. I'm not the one that gets to make this decision for you, especially, but I'm also not the one that gets to make this decision for theologians everywhere. This is just one voice and one perspective tossed into the fray. Um, but I appreciate this comment. I'm not trying to be Jewish. I'm just trying to follow what God has asked of me. But I think the whole theological reasoning in Old and New Testament is God didn't ask that of you. God asked that of the Jewish people who stood at Mount Sinai. This is what they're doing in Acts 15 when they get together and they're like, do Gentiles have to be circumcised? Do Gentiles have to eat kosher? And they end up coming away from that meeting saying, no, they didn't fall under the Sinai covenant. They're not out Sinai. They don't stand at the foot of that mountain. They didn't come out of Egypt. They didn't enter in that covenant. The covenant that they entered into, the covenant that's applicable to them, is the Noahic covenant, the covenant of Noah. Now, again, I think a lot of Messianic thinkers come out of Acts 15 and say, okay, so they don't have to, but they certainly can. And ultimately, if they really understood Torah, they should. Again, I fundamentally disagree. I think that's an assumption. I think it's a bad one. And that's just my take. Again, only my take. You'll find lots of people that see it differently. But this is where you start to see where I diverge from maybe a more typical, not all, but maybe a lot of typical Messianic readings and theologies and presentations, and why often I'll make a point of saying I'm really not in the same room or having the same conversation as a lot of those thoughts. So looks like we had some live questions that came in.
Well, two more follow-up points. Dylan says, "Oh yeah, he did mean
Brent,
Jesus,
I'm
not
never going to get
Paul."
through this document.
I
I'm
know.
never going to get through this document.
I'm gonna make it so fast. Dylan said he did mean Jesus, not Paul. So there's that. And he
Okay.
also
Okay.
said that many guys aren't open to discussing things if their wife is in the room or if it's a mixed small group. There's a time and place for both. And I think that's not what you were saying. I'll say what I think, and you tell me. The primary group should be a mixed group. If you don't have interactions with all parts of the image of God, then you're missing out on something. Not that you shouldn't also have some more dedicated focus spaces for certain things, but if your primary group is not a mixed group where you're interacting with all sorts of people, then you're missing out.
I would agree with that. If you don't have relationships with men where you're able to go out and grab a beer or sit around a campfire, then yeah, you got to have those relationships. I'm assuming that we have those relationships in our lives. When I think of the church facilitating fellowship, I do not think of the church as a place where they facilitate gender specific. That starts to feel really wacky and weird to me, to be honest. That's just a personal take of mine. They might be able to facilitate, like we used to have things at Real Life called Me and Threes in Moscow, and they would facilitate gender specific connections. So we had, we had co-ed. It feels like such a weird reference. Co-ed small groups, but then we would have gender specific accountability groups, and the church helped us facilitate those. But they also weren't nearly as run. They didn't have a curriculum. They weren't as overseen. They just helped facilitate the connection of those groups that we could connect on those levels. But yeah, you got to have those connections. When I think of the church and what the church facilitates, like the institution of the church, what the church facilitates for me is fellowship, the larger body of Christ. And I'm going to meet people there that I'm going to build those other relationships, the relationships I'm going to sit around the campfire. And and have those conversations when I need to have them. I also think we have really overdone that as well. I think the church largely has, especially when it comes to sexual ethics and purity culture. We've really done the whole, like, you got to be in gender specific stuff because you got to be telling your secrets and you got to be having those tough conversations. And I don't think that's bore good fruit at all. I do need to have those conversations. I do need to have, but I think that's come facilitated with a whole heap of shame. To be two spoonfuls of shame, and so it's not all or nothing. I always have a group of friends I could call at any moment, a group of guys that I could have those conversations with, and I meet with them regularly, and I have those conversations, and we talk about those things that you're referencing. I think we have a tendency in a lot of evangelical circles to really make that a big deal. And I think it feels wacky and unhealthy to me. And then we have these really dysfunctional views on gender and everything else. And I don't know how to relate to the opposite sex or how to treat them appropriately, or just how to, like, I don't even know how to relate to them and not exploit them, and not because that's not my fellowship. Like, my fellowship is always like on this, like, gender specific accountability. I'm rambling now. Why are you guys getting me on all my soapboxes tonight, everybody? That's
You
not what
got
these are for.
fire emojis breaking out in the comments.
Oh, fire emojis. Okay, good. Okay, good. Well, then that's a good spot to live it. I'm moving on. Does the land of Israel matter? Oh, golly, guys. Dylan, you're killing me here. Just asking me all the things. I'm not going to have any messianic friends at all when this live stream is over. Goodness. Not related to current events, just interpreting Old to New Testament and a new creation. How does the Gentile gospel mesh with the promised land and their fellow Jews? Also, Eliza said, I also have the same question about the actual land of Israel, but my question is related to current events. I'm still trying to learn some here. Guys, I'll be honest with you. Some people that I really respect have a totally different position than I do. And so I'm trying to listen and I'm trying to learn. And some of those voices actually are some of my friends, and excuse me, I'm a part of these Messianic fellowships. And I really respect their perspectives. And so I'm trying to listen and learn about their perspectives on the land of Israel. Abraham Joshua Heschel wrote Echoes of Eternity, I think. And I think it was Heschel. I think that was Heschel. And it was my least favorite Heschel book. I think I even kind of disagreed half with what Heschel said. So I'm just trying to learn. I'm trying to figure out if I'm wrong. Am I the one that's off? My really quick, rough, raw answer to that, not related to current events. I believe that the resurrected Christ, the reality of the resurrected Christ, has changed everything. I don't believe God's about physical addresses anymore. I don't believe the land of Israel occupies the same thing when God opened up his new temple and went to the ends of the earth and dwells in his people, Jew and Gentile alike. I don't think the land, it's not that I'm saying the land doesn't matter, period. It's that I'm saying the land doesn't occupy the same theological space for me that it did in a pre-resurrection world. Now, if we want to start talking about current events, I think that's a different conversation, less theological, more sociopolitical. What does it mean for all human beings to have a place, to have a home, to have the right to exist, both Jew and Palestinian, both Israeli and Palestinian? I think that's, I'm not a Zionist. I'm not looking for some day when Jerusalem is restored and a new temple is built, and that's not me at all, period, full stop. But I am, I don't think that conversation is in the same theological nature it was in, say, the book of Chronicles. And I believe that's part of the good news of Jesus and the kingdom of God, and what we are supposed to be showing the world about what the Jesus reality looks like. And this is the tragedy of why we've failed on so many levels. I won't be adding a bunch of other current event perspectives. It is an absolute complicated mess. I know that that's going to make every side upset, because apparently I get canceled by both conservatives and progressives by saying it's complicated. Like, if we can't see the terror that happened, the horrible atrocities of Hamas, and call that for what it is, which is horrible, I don't even know. I don't even know where to begin. Like if we can't recognize the plight of the Palestinians and their like the humanitarian need for them to be recognized as people and a place to live in peace and flourish, I don't know where to begin. Like if we also can't acknowledge the power of empire that just carpet bombs, and if we can't acknowledge that there's problems with that, I'm not talking sociopolitically and strategy. I'm just saying, like, if we can't acknowledge some of those basic things, like this is not shalom. This is not shalom. And there's not a people group that because they're wearing the right T-shirt, will they get to? Nope. It's just not. It's never shalom. Redemptive violence is never the way of how we understand as Jesus followers what the kingdom is going to look like. So I don't know what side to take. It's complicated, super complicated, because there's the history of how we got here, and then there's what's happening today, and then there's what it's going to take to move forward, and there's all kinds of different periods of history. There's sociological realities, so many things that I'm not an expert in. Golly. So I've yet to see somebody post a meme on Instagram that made me go like, yeah, you got him. That's it. Like I have all these progressive friends that they got memes for days about, but they were awfully quiet. They've been awfully quiet about how this thing got started. And then I have all these people that are like pro-Israel no matter what. And I'm like, I'm not sure that's it either. Yeah, I guess I talked about it, didn't I? An Echo of Eternity by Abraham Joshua Heschel. All right. James asked this question. I'll probably not make it out of this live stream. This was the last live stream for Bema, apparently today. I don't know why all these questions have gotten me, but they have. This will not be the live stream that I go to sleep tonight and go like, I nailed that one. So I'll be up for about 3 hours tonight just staring wide-eyed at the ceiling for how I handled myself. Oopsie daisy. Why does Marty use Hebrew pronunciation of words whilst speaking in English? It sounds very odd. I appreciate that, James. Thank you. Well, James, I noticed you used the word whilst, which is British English, by the way, and I think that sounds funny. No, I bring that up because language is that way. Like, right? Because language, like, just because I'm in America, does that mean my English is better than British English? When I'm in the UK, does that mean that? Well, I use those words because it helps me do a couple things. Learn, well, probably a few things. It helps me learn Hebrew. Like that's where I started learning Hebrew, by saying certain Hebrew words out loud. It's where I started to get some of that stuff in me. Number two, it reminds me that the story isn't just an Anglo-European King James translation, NIV. Like it reminds me that this story goes back way before that. It reminds me that there's like an earlier story that I'm a tree that we're grafted into. It reminds me of that. Third, I would say it honors their story. It's a way of respecting and honoring the fact that this is a Jewish story, and these people are Jews, and their name wasn't Lot, it was Lot. Their name wasn't Abram, it was Avram. And so I like to use those words. I like to work those words in there because it kind of serves as this occasional reminder. Now, on the flip side, James, people have found it super frustrating that I refuse to use, like, you should say Yeshua. His name was Yeshua. Like, don't say Jesus. His name was Yeshua. His name was Yeshua. I mean, I get that. I kind of find the whole thing just a little bit overdone. And so I've just I've made my own decisions. I've kind of found my own sweet spot of where I like to use those words, where I like to, and where it just feels obnoxious to me. because I feel like the overuse of like Yeshua, like everybody like it's Yeshua, is like, okay, but generally most of us have used the name Jesus for quite some time. So at some point it just starts to feel more obnoxious to me than anything else. Doesn't mean you have to agree. I just find my sweet spot where there's a little bit of both. There's a little bit of engagement with the Hebrew language, and there's the fact that I'm not trying to make this a Hebrew text or speak everything in Hebrew. It's just a sweet spot that I like, and it's totally okay that it's not everybody's sweet spot. Sounds like it might not be yours. Sorry about that. You got 390 episodes of that, and and I'm not sure I have plans to change. So, but I appreciate the question. But language is tricky, and language is also beautiful. I love, even though I gave you a hard time, and it does sound funny to me. I love that you would use the word whilst. It's fun. Adds a little flair to that message, doesn't it? Same reason that I use the Hebrew language. Just add a little helpful flair, not a showy flair, just a little bit of helpful educational flair. Let's see. TJ says in podcast 158, Ephesians, family membership, there's a comment on the festival of Artemis as a statue washing and procession back to the temple, which ended up a bit promiscuously, although I do not doubt this in any way. Before I give background to Bible study I'm teaching, I like to confirm with other sources if possible. In this case, I've not been able to find anything on the actual Artemisian festival practices. Would you be able to assist in providing more detail and sources? So love the question, TJ. So at the beginning of the Revelation series, first episode, we gave a whole list of resources, and they're dense. I get it. They're thick. But the reason we gave those resources is because that's the bulk of where a lot of our research is going to be able to be traced back to. Not everything, not every last detail, but a lot of it. So in this case, that detail, Roland Worth has 2 works that I have recommended, both in that in that episode that I spoke of and referenced. I've also recommended them on Goodreads within the last 2 or 3 years. Roland Worth, The 7 Churches of the Apocalypse and Greco-Asian Culture. He has another volume called The 7 Churches of the Apocalypse and Roman Culture. And in those 2 volumes, Roland Worth will quote over 700 sources. It's one of the most, apparently he's not even like a vocational scholar. He just loves to research, and did all of this theological research over the years. And he's seen as one of the staple sources. And 700 sources cited. It is one of the most thorough compilation works that I've found. But he'll go over every city. That's the 7 cities of Revelation. He'll do a bunch of context there as it relates to the Greco-Asian context, as it relates to the Roman context. I know he does. He has a section on there on the Artemisian festival. You can find other bits and pieces here and there. I want to say 7 Minute Seminary might have done. I'm trying to think of the 7 Minute Seminary on the Xenophon, if they talked about it in that presentation or not. I cannot remember. But that's the best. And then the other work is Ethelbert Stauffer that we recommend. So if you get the 2 volumes by Roland Worth, and then you get Ethelbert Stauffer's Christ and the Caesars, you're going to be, that's a pretty good baseline. I also recommended Days of Vengeance by Chilton in that podcast episode. It has some great literary observations, but I just reread it like 2 or 3 months ago, and it is so anti-Semitic. It's like it's very reformed theology, and it's very anti-Semitic, very supersessionist. Almost too hard to stomach, but it does have some cool little literary nuggets in there if you can stomach getting through it to find those. But I digress. That's where I would go, TJ, for that is, TJ, can I just mention that you're asking specifically about the Ephesians episode? So you might not even be at Revelation yet. So you have not even heard. Usually that comment will come from a Revelation conversation. But yeah, so Roland Worth, sorry for all of that other digression. It was a waste of everybody's time because I didn't pay attention and read your question well enough. See, this is why we value questions. This is why we gotta Gotta get better listening. Like I said, this is not going to go down as Marty Solomon's best live stream tonight. No siree. Okay. Let's see here. Terry says this: is there any plan to retitle your episodes? While your names are very clever, it's very difficult to find particular biblical passages based on those names. It would be great if subtitles were included so that we would know which passages were covered. There are no plans, and I will not be giving up my clever titles. Thank you very much, Terry. That's more me just kind of giving you a wink and a hard time. I like my clever titles. We do have subtitles, and they are in there, by the way. And Brent usually does a pretty good job with those. He's gotten better and better and better over time at making those more and more useful. So those subtitles, your podcast player may not show them very readily, but we do have subtitles for every episode, little descriptions of what the episode covers. We do not, and we get questions about this all the time, by the way. Similar kind of question. Can you please put the passage you're covering in the episode, put it in the description? We've wrestled with this numerous times, and the answer is always the same for us. We're not going to do that because what we're trying to do, we are not a commentary. We're not an audio commentary. We are not trying to be the source that you can go, like, we're not trying to be a reference library. We're trying to invite all of us to spend time in the text and get familiar with the text. So that's what we're really trying and striving to do. We want us to spend time in the scriptures. So we're not going to tell you, like you'll generally be able to pick it up. Like Brent's going to tell you he's in Ephesians chapter 3. But we want you to go to Ephesians chapter 3. We want you to find the passage. We want you to spend time in the text, wrestling with those kind of things. And we're not trying to be a resource library. We're trying to teach us how to think, not what to think. How to think, not what to think. So I know that lots of people want to go find the episode on John 3. Lots of people would want to go find an episode on whatever, and I get that. And we're not trying to keep you from doing that. But we also are trying to kind of take us on a journey and teach us along the way. Like, I want to teach you how to study the Bible for yourself. That's my goal. Because I'm not that smart. I don't know if you've noticed. I've said a bunch of dumb things tonight. I've gotten some things wrong, even tonight. Can't read somebody's question and pay attention. I'm not your great expert. I don't have the letters after your name. You can't quote me on a paper. You quote me on a paper with a professor that's paying attention, he is going to reject me as a source, and he should. I am not a source. I'm not an expert. But I love to share the things that I've learned from experts, because I have studied with people that are experts, and I love to share that stuff. And I love to teach us how to think and suggest ways to reframe things and ask different questions. So anyway, so that's why we'll use our clever titles. We'll try to be practical with our subtitles. Brent, I see your face on there. You need to do better with your subtitles, Brent Billings.
Well, I will just say, let me just show the website here. This is the search page, and if you enter a term into this search box on the Babel website, it will find anything in the title, subtitle, or description, show notes, whatever. So if you're trying to figure out where was that Roland Worth book recommended, type in Roland Worth, and you'll see the episodes wherever that's mentioned. So that's there. But yeah, as far as like, where did they discuss? I mean, sometimes we're not even gonna know. But like, where did they discuss Isaiah 56 verse 3? It's like, well, did we discuss that? I don't know, actually. I can maybe tell you where we discussed Isaiah 56. I don't know if we covered verse 3. I'm not going to be able to tell you exactly what we talked about. So yeah, it's not meant to be that. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I think if we put that in there, it would just encourage people to use it the way that we're not really designing it to be used.
Yeah. You're just one of us. You're just one of us. We want you guys to just be one of us. Come along with us, learn how to, and I get it. I understand that I have a big influential voice. Everybody likes to come back at me about, but you don't understand the influence you have. I do, but I'm not, just because I understand I have influence doesn't mean I have to seize it. Doesn't mean I have to seize it and use it and as a club, or I have to recognize that it's there and steward it well. And that's what I'm really trying to do right now with this very conversation, is steward that influence well and say, I would prefer to teach you all to come along with me. That's what I would rather do with my influence. So we got a podcast mic. We got an internet connection. We like to read a bunch of books. And you guys can all do that too. So come along with us. Come along, learn. Speaking of clever titles, I look in my Google Doc, and Brent Billings has said, pause for station identification. And then he says 95.1 WICM Albany, which I see how clever that is, Brent Billings.
I was particularly happy about that.
Oh man, see, we're just too happy with ourselves. That's the problem, Terry. Terry, we should just be able to tell you in the subtitles where we're going, but we're just too happy with our own clever. Look at us. We're so funny.
I might be horrified if there's actually a 95.1 something in Albany, and it's like, whatever.
Yep. Impact started in Albany back in 1995. It was a different organization. We're technically, legally a different organization than we were back then, but 95.1 WICM, Impact Campus Ministries, Albany. Very clever. Very, very clever. Speaking of Impact Campus Ministries, speaking of pausing for station identification, we always stop somewhere around the top of the hour. It's 9:02 Eastern Time. And we always stop just long enough to say thank you. Man, and this is December. Like, I'm not sure we ever feel our gratitude as much as we feel it right now. So we're in the middle of this giving season. You all know this. Every single one of you, I'm sure. Your email inbox, your physical mailbox is full of letters. It's that time of year. Like, some 83% of all charitable giving comes in between November and December every single year. What was the crazy stat I heard the other day? Like 20 some odd % of all charitable giving happens in the last 3 days of the year or something like that. It is wild. And that's true for all nonprofits, not just Impact Campus Ministries, not BEMA, all nonprofits. This is the time of the year that makes things go. And it's because of the tax calendar and all that. And I get that. But we're all nonprofits everywhere are grateful, and we're filled with gratitude, and we love it. And we want to say thank you. Our year end is going really strong, and it's how we balance our budget. So right as December comes, we start, like, we're just getting to the place where we're like, uh-oh. And then year end always sends us to a balanced budget for the rest of the fiscal year. And we're just so thankful, and we're grateful. We don't think we're any better than all those other nonprofits, all those other organizations that ask for your money and need your money and your generous donations and just your generosity. Lots of organizations need that. We're no better than them. We're just glad that we're one of them, and that you see that. And as I always say, we just hope that we steward that well. We hope that we steward this season of giving well in our communication, and the way that we'll use those funds, the way we'll steward those funds for the work of BEMA, for the work of campus ministry, for the work that God's doing and asking us to do. So we're thankful. But Brent's got a website pulled up there. If people want to get in on the year-end giving, BEMA is a part of Impact Campus Ministries. What else you want to show us, Brent?
I don't know. What do you want to see?
Well, you just go to that website right there, impacttheu.com. I figured Brent was going to do something tricky.
Yeah. You can go to the donate page.
Donate page.
Doreen was impressed with the very large cursor, so you can easily see it when you're watching this on the phone.
Brent thinks of everything, guys. I'm telling you.
I don't know if it's,
But there you go. Yeah. If you want to give to BEMA, you can do everything from find names of staff there to just give to BEMA Ministry. If you give to BEMA Ministry, it's one of the most versatile places that you can give. So it's that time of year. People are giving. People are getting ready for their tax years, and we're just thankful. So just thank you. We're not going to do a big financial thing here, but just we pause for 3.5 minutes to say we see it. We're grateful. We've lost 20 viewers over the course of me doing this. Time to get them back.
Time to thin the crowd a little bit, Nah.
Jesus did it. All right.
John 6:66, baby.
That's right. He said, you got to eat my flesh and drink my blood. I just said, hey, let's talk about money. That's all it takes.
It's practically the same thing, right?
Practically the same thing. All right. Here's a live question. How do you think the current turmoil in Israel will affect next year's study trips? Hard to know. What's going on right now is not normal. So there's a normal, like there's a normal back and forth that seems to happen every single year. When I was actually in the airport the day the attacks began, that Saturday, I was leading a private tour over to
In the
Israel.
airport in the US. You hadn't actually
Yes,
left yet.
yes, I was on the U.S. side. When things started, we weren't at the airport. We were just in our hotels. I woke up to text messages. I feel like this happens every single trip. They're firing rockets. Okay, yep, this is normal. Everybody calm down. And then we realized very, very soon and quickly that this wasn't the normal back and forth. What that means is it's hard to know. It's very hard to know. We're very optimistic. Um, so our March trip, GTI has just been able to hold. We're going to buy as much time as we can. We're going to make it as little risk as possible as far as having to sign up and spend our money and all that kind of stuff. We're just going to buy some time. And so we're waiting to see what happens. We've been really optimistic. I think as time just continues to drag on, obviously that optimism starts to check itself. But Turkey's going to be fine. Turkey's not a problem unless something really weird were to happen. I mean, you never know what the future holds, period.
Right?
So I won't say it's a for sure thing, but Turkey at this point would not be threatened. We're super optimistic about September. And again, that optimism isn't a for sure thing. We're just optimistic right now. It's a long time out. Things should change by then. The scenario should change quite a bit, and I mean that would just be what you would expect. Will it change soon enough for our March trip? We'll see. We'll see. So yeah, it could affect next year's study trips, but it's not for sure going to impact next year's study trips. So stay tuned. Stay
I
tuned and
think
find out.
last we heard, Turkish Airlines, who we used to fly over there, has canceled their flights into Israel through February. So if we
Yep.
get into February and Turkish says, we don't see an end to this at this point, we're going to cancel, like that's that. We don't have any control over that. Like there's lots of things that we can and can't control. But at the end of the day, like we're not going to make any decisions that's going to jeopardize anybody's safety knowingly. And when things have
Yeah.
happened, when trips are on the ground, like safety, like get you out of the country, like the team at GTI is incredible at keeping track of everything and making everything work out. So
Yep, and that movement's already started. So they canceled all but they canceled those flights by whittling them down. So there's 2 or 3 flights into Tel Aviv every day, and they kind of they start canceling those to where there's one left, and they eventually just cancel them. They did that through February. They've begun whittling the flights down even in March. So that's an indication that that's the direction that they're headed. If things were to change, we've already been rebooked on that remaining flight. But things are kind of pointing in that direction. So we'll see what happens over the next. We have about another month before we have to make a decision. So if something were to start changing in a month, it could change the conversation. But as soon as Turkish Air decides to pull the plug on those flights, it will be a good indication and a chance for us to do something else. So we have discussions about potentially turning that trip into a impromptu Turkey trip. So we'll see. So we'll see how that works. But all right. So that's a good question. I'm going to keep moving. Kevin says, should we attend a church knowing that the preacher has stated that the Old Testament is not for us? Same preacher has stated that they are a New Testament church. My family had been going to this church for 20 years, but no longer attend since those statements have been made. We serve in their youth department. It's hard for us to do anything in the main service. We've learned through Bema that you cannot understand the New Testament if you don't know the Hebrew text. Yeah, it's always hard. These conversations are always hard. Will I ever be able to tell you, Kevin, or anybody else, like, should you go to a church or not go to? No way. I mean, those are decisions that only you can discern. We all find ourselves in these weird positions. I have found myself usually, almost always, in a church that had a good heart and a decent hermeneutic. What I mean by that is they read the Bible with decent historical awareness. I've never been to a church that had this particular stance, But what I mean when I share that is I've never been to a church where like everybody says everything the way that I would see it, and there's always some problem. The question is whether or not, is that a deal breaker of an issue? Are you forced to say something or sign on to something or affirm things that you just in good conscience can't affirm? Is it a small enough deal that you can kind of be along for the ride and in good faith find ways to serve and to I've always had the good fortune of being able to say yes. Like there's always enough space, enough alignment, that I can find a way to be there and have a positive influence and a voice. I'm also aware that that's largely because I'm a white male. So I just naturally will end up in the rooms where people are making decisions and I can have that influence. I know for a lot of people who aren't like me that they don't have access to those rooms, and it can be even more and more and more frustrating to have to be a part of those environments. So I'm aware that my situation is my situation, and other situations are different. There often comes a point. The things that matter more to me is whether or not it's healthy. Does it does it call out your flourishing? Does the church fellowship should be there for our own spiritual and human flourishing? Like we should flourish as followers of Jesus. We should be more loving people because our church is there and because we attend and we're a part and we serve. That should be when church starts to not only not enable our flourishing, but actually starts to harm us. Those are the things that really get my attention. But even outside of that, there are even maybe it's not necessarily harmful, but is there enough alignment here that I can be here in good conscience? I mean, if we can't even be involved in the Sunday morning service, um, it's pretty hard to imagine. Like, I can't even be in worship with this fellowship. That's a good indication that things are. You probably don't want to spend the next 10 years in that space. I'll put it that way. And that doesn't mean leave. That work might be work that you need to do. I don't know. I have no idea what your situation is. Couldn't speak to that. But where you're at, totally get it. Totally get it. And it's tricky and a part of that discernment. So, yeah, I can't say no. My question to that isn't, no, you can't attend a church. You can. You can attend a church. But my answer isn't that you should either, because I can't know that. But I don't think you're asking me to know that either. So there's my thought. Aaron says, concerning the into the pit and out of the pit, I'm considering a positive framing of Joseph in Genesis 39, 8 through 9. People didn't like my negative framing of Joseph, but that's okay. Totally get that. Unlike the older brother and the prodigal son of Luke 15, who complains that the father has given him nothing, Joseph is not even the son of Potiphar and recognizes how much he has been given. In Luke 15:22, the prodigal son gets a robe and a ring, just like Joseph gets a robe and a ring. Somebody's found a remez. Erin might not even be in session 3. She may not even know what a remez is. Who knows? You'll get there eventually, Erin, but if you don't even know Pardes and what we've talked about with those rabbinical hermeneutics, then you are way ahead of the ballgame. You are on top of it. This is how the Jewish mind works. I propose that Joseph could be viewed as an example of a person who trusts the story. I think of it as he trusts the story that God is a good father who is for him, no matter the circumstances, and lives accordingly. It seems like Joseph, in his line of thinking, is the best version of a son. He is not wasteful like the prodigal son, and he lives in full confidence of his blessing, unlike the prodigal son's older brother. I love it. And Rabbi Foreman does similar. I mean, he draws some similar parallels in the teaching that we based our teaching off of him. So I think he has a whole teaching on goats and coats. I think it's like a 4 or 5 part teaching called Goats and Coats. At least the one that I heard was a really old lecture. I'm sure Aleph Beta has some new stuff. But what I love here, Aaron, is your textual connections that you're drawing. And you're leaping ahead to the New Testament, which isn't typically the direction, but you're thinking text. You're thinking text to text and text to text and text to text. And I love that. And I also love that what you're doing here is you're digging further into the text. You're forming your own opinions. You're thinking critically. You're not going like, well, Marty said something different, so I just must be wrong because I obviously he knows and I don't. You're not saying that. You're digging in. You're seeing what you see, the critical thinking, the sharing with others. Like everything about this is just so chef's kiss. Mwah. So nice. So nice. So just good work, Aaron. I just wish that we had a million more people just like you. The world would be a better place, no matter right or wrong, that we would engage the text in this way. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Angie, I started listening shortly after discovering my biological Jewish family. Unknown to me due to my dad's adoption, I am curious about what led Marty to decide to be a Torah-observant Messianic Jew after being raised in a Christian family. As I begin connecting and talking to my Jewish family, I find myself unsure of how to identify my own heritage. I wasn't raised Jewish, even though if I am biologically part Jewish, so what makes a person a Jew? How do I relate to a family culturally and spiritually so different? This is a fantastic question, Angie. This is an unbelievably messy and complicated question. And had I known how messy and complicated it was 20 years ago, not quite, 10, 12 years ago, 15, coming up on 15 years ago, when I made that decision, I don't know if it would have impacted the decision I made. At that point, I was simply trying to live. Like I knew of my Jewish heritage. I have paternal Jewish heritage, named Solomon, coming out of Western Europe. We knew our family crest, our family history. We knew we have Jewish heritage. It seems that I just was over in the UK doing some family history research. It seems that we have Jesus following Jewish heritage at least for a few generations in our family towards the 16th century or so. So I was aware of that. And so all I was trying to do, I had been teaching this new perspective on Paul that I referenced earlier with, was it Aaron, his question? And so I'd been diving deep in the new perspective on Paul. Ray had helped me understand Paul within Judaism. I was teaching that. I was teaching that Gentiles ought to be Gentiles. Jews ought to be Jews. We should be confident in our own identity. I had just never considered my own Jewish heritage as a part of my identity. And Ray brought that up and we chatted about that. And all I was attempting to do was to live in a way that was congruent. That was, what am I trying to say? It was consistent with what I believed about the text and what I understood about theology. Now, my understanding of theology is the same today in those regards. I haven't changed in what I understand and what I understand about my own identity or what that means about how my relationship to Torah. What has changed is my appreciation for the cultural messiness of your question. You asked the question at the end. What makes a person a Jew? In the biblical day, in Second Temple Judaism, and this will be debated by some, not by everybody, but by some will debate this. Definitely in Old Testament, what we would call Old Testament Judaism, but First Temple Judaism, one might say, I haven't heard that term necessarily, but in First and Second Temple Judaism, Jewish lineage was paternal. Jewish father, the son of a Jewish father, children of a Jewish father were Jewish. That's why a Jewish man could marry a Gentile woman, because it was a patriarchal culture. So when you marry, the woman comes into the patriarchal household and she takes on and assumes the faith and the worship of that patriarchal family. So if a Jewish man marries a Gentile woman, she comes into a Jewish family. That's why in Second Temple Judaism, a Jewish woman was not allowed to marry a Gentile man. This was the story of Timothy in the New Testament. A Jewish woman has married a Gentile man, or fell in love with, or he fathered her child, whatever the details of that were. And in Torah and in the Second Temple Judaism, that wasn't allowed because the female assumes, takes on the patriarchal worship and belief system of the pagan Gentile husband. So that's why men could and women couldn't. That's the backstory to that, right? So lineage in early Judaism is paternal. In Talmudical Judaism, later, 200 years later, people argue about whether or not it was before. There's an argument there. But somewhere towards the days of Talmud, Judaism becomes maternal. And there are probably some historical, practical reasons for that, with all the different oppressions and inquisitions and crusades and all the different things that the Jews went through, where there was so much different assault. And I don't want to use too many trigger words, but sometimes you wouldn't know who the father was, but you always knew which womb the baby came out of. And so descent was switched to maternal for both biblical, spiritual, and practical reasons. That's Talmudical Judaism. So the question is, do Jesus followers today, if they're Jewish, if they're ethnically Jewish, do Jesus followers today follow a Judaism of 2,000 years ago that's no longer a thing? It's the Judaism of Jesus, but it's not the Judaism of today, because that would be weird. That's weird. It's weird to follow a Judaism that no longer exists. But it's also equally weird, in my mind, for an ethnic Jew to follow Judaism as it's changed, apart from the Jesus tradition, because all of Judaism agrees that Jesus isn't the guy. So they've went on their own journey for 2,000 years. So does an ethnic Jew follow this Judaism or this Judaism? Both of them feel weird. And that becomes a little tricky. I was recently told that in a lot of ways, the way that I view scripture and interact with it is similar to what's known as the Karaite sect of Jews. There's a sect of Jews, not necessarily a large sect of Jews, but there's a sect of Jews that believe that it's the written Torah. Written Torah is what we follow. Oral tradition might be, we respect it, we'll get insight from it, but it's not on the same level as, say, written Torah. So they don't follow Talmud. And so my perspective apparently aligns with Karaite Judaism in a lot of ways. Don't know a whole lot to speak to the depths of that. All that to say, Angie, it's tricky. It's really tricky and it's really messy. And I could not tell you what to do. What I can tell you is some of the most helpful advice I got from anybody in my own journey came from Jews and Gentiles, but Jews, Orthodox Jews, with all of their pushback against Christianity and all of their fear of disregard, just frustration with appropriationism. I had Orthodox Jews routinely, many of them tell me, you're on a journey with God. Follow God. God will not lead you astray. They didn't tell me yes. They didn't tell me no. And it was one of the most encouraging things to have people say, I'm not telling you what to do. I'm saying follow God. Follow God. Which feels very, the episode in session 2, the Naaman? Go in Peace was the episode. And it was on Naaman and Elisha. It's one of my favorite teachings. A lot of people say it's one of their favorite teachings that I did in the podcast. Just the idea of Naaman, of Elisha looking at Naaman and saying, go in peace. You'll figure it out. Just follow God. It'll be okay. I just, that was deeply, so I say the same thing to you. It's messy. It's complicated. A lot of it, I think, depends on your context, your family, the people that are around you, your fellowship, your understanding and convictions about scripture, all those things. There you go. That's what I have to say about that. 12 questions remaining, Brent says. Here we go. Scott, currently, I'm somewhere in the mid-50s of the episodes. Episode 50-something. I like the talk of distributed justice rather than retributive justice. As I look at much of the Tanakh, I see what a lot of sins were punishable by death, like stoning. My question is, what kind of crime would get distributed justice? For the Jews, all justice is I don't know if distributive would be the right word, but all justice is restorative justice. So one of the things that's historically, like just historically, we don't know historically that Jews practiced capital punishment a whole lot at all. The evidence seems to say that they took Torah and they used it with the weight of mercy and grace, and it very rarely was used to exact, say, capital punishment, punitive subjugative punishment, that it was almost always restorative punishment, because the way that Jews have always seen the law is different than what many of you and I believe or think or assume. We will often see the law as a code, a moral code, an absolute moral code that has to be adhered to. No deviation, it's a moral code. Jews, in their perspective, see the law as not what to think, but how to think. The law is teaching you how to render judgments. So the law is teaching you how to, and so in a lot of ways, Jews will look at the laws that say capital punishment, and they'll say, okay, this is teaching us how to think. Why is the gravity of this crime so high? Now, they'll also use every explanation, I want to say loophole, but they'll use every explanation they can to show mercy, to bring about restoration, but the Torah is teaching them how to think. And so that's where those laws come from. And it doesn't mean that they never stone people. Obviously, if we believe our gospels are historical, and I do, then they're trying to stone people routinely in the gospels. I think that's probably historically, there's some accuracy to that historically. So I'm not saying they never stoned anybody or there was no capital punishment, but I think we read that code and we think that that stuff was happening. Like every time a son rebelled against his father and disrespected his father, he was stoned to death. No, but the Jew would say that law is trying to teach me how to think. It's trying to teach me, like, there's something about this law that's super important. There's a weight and a gravity to this, and why is that? So that's one of those things that I would say. Zayad. I'm trying to think if I'm saying that. Is there any other way I could say that? Zayad. I'm probably saying that incorrectly. I'm up to session 3 on The Chosen, and I find it really distracting that Mary, mother of Jesus, is in every episode. Did she really travel around with Jesus for all those sermons? Why was she not mentioned in any of those Gospels, or for that matter, in the New Testament, if she really was so prevalent? Did he really depend on her so much throughout his ministry? We're not told for sure. We're also not told she's not. So it's kind of an argument from silence. We really don't know one way or another. One of the things that I've really appreciated, because I've really appreciated learning throughout all of my spiritual development, I've really appreciated learning from my Catholic brothers and sisters. And the place that Mary, mother of Jesus, has, or the place that she doesn't have in Protestant theology as a reaction against Catholicism, I find to be equally as concerning. And so one of the things I've loved about The Chosen is they have this value of wanting to be able to speak and tell this story for as wide of an audience as they possibly can. And they're not going, I mean, Dallas, we've had Dallas on twice to interview, and he's very adamant. I don't care about pleasing people. I don't care about whether or not people are going to get upset. That's not at all why I'm making, but I am going to try to tell the story in a way that the most amount of people can come and engage. And I do love that they're not overly doing the Mary stuff, in my opinion. It's probably more than we're used to. But I think that would be one of the things that I would say. Why do we always assume that she's not present? Why do we always assume, I mean, church tradition is going to actually make her a lot more present. That's not scripture. It's not the same thing. But I think Protestant Christianity is very Mary adverse. Like we don't like, we just are immediately aware of, like, Mary's in the room. Oh, we're not going to be Catholic. And we have this, and I think that's been trained into us one way or another. And so I get what you're saying, and my feeling's no better than your feeling. So, but that's some of the ways that I've looked at it and I've seen it. But I appreciate what you're getting at, for sure. But it's part of what I love about the Catholic presence in my life and what they're able to teach me and what it's able to do for me. I've learned a lot over the years once I softened to that a little. And I'm not Catholic, so I don't land in a lot of those same places, but I've still learned a lot, and they have sharpened my faith. Alex says, I am wondering if having a copy of the Septuagint is a good idea to help understand my depth of the Bible. If so, there are so many copies on Amazon, and I don't know which one to get because they are in Greek, and I don't read or speak Greek. Yeah. So that is the Septuagint. The Septuagint is going to be in Greek, and you're going to have to read Greek to be able to utilize it on some level. They used to have a digital copy, and as far as I'm aware, they quit producing it. There was a digital e-copy that Brent and I and a handful of people before Bema was ever a podcast, we got off of Amazon. It was like $4, and it hyperlinks. Like there are hyperlinks to all the words. So you can just go to anywhere you want. You can click on it, and it functions kind of like Bible Gateway. It will take you to where that word shows up in all of the Septuagint, and it links between your New Testament and your Old. And it was just it is so helpful. It still functions on my Kindle today, and I'm so thankful for it. I'm not aware. I do know that Bible Gateway, not Bible Gateway, Blue Letter Bible always has the Septuagint. If you open up any verse in Blue Letter Bible, it will have the Hebrew and your concordance, but then at the bottom, it will also give your Septuagint verse there. So you don't have to buy a physical copy and be able to read Greek. You can actually use a digital copy of that on Blue Letter Bible. So check that out. That's what we use. If Brent has answers for the other ones, I'm sure he'll put it in the comments or pop onto my screen, but I don't think it exists anymore. Let's see here. Mark says, I have a question regarding episode 86, Luke. Brent and Marty described the Jewish practice of parashah and haftarah synagogue readings, completing the Torah every year and the rest of Tanakh every 3 years. Yes, you got it. Finding a schedule of weekly parashah readings was pretty straightforward, but I'm not able to find a comparable schedule of haftarah readings. What I have found includes readings from the prophets, but not the writings. So if it's the haftarah, if it's listed as haftarah, the haftarah won't be everything. It won't be all of the prophets, and it won't be all of the writings. A lot of the writings are used as holiday readings. So a lot of your writings won't be worked in, but the haftarah will have some writings from the Ketuvim. It will mostly be Nevi'im. So the haftarah readings are the haftarah readings. Whatever you're finding, I would imagine, has to be the haftarah. I don't know if the haftarah today has changed much from Goulder's work. So in that episode 86, we talk about M.D. Goulder and his work. I like to use his diagram because he's basing it off of the old Babylonian Talmud that he's working with. I think it's the same haftarah and parashah. It might have some slight differences. I'm not sure. But he's also worked in all the Ketuvim writings, and he also works in his perspective of Brit Hadashah, what we would call the New Testament, the Younger Testament. So you could find, not that you could find that, but that's what I often will look at. Hebrew for Christians, Hebrew, the number 4 Christians.com.org. I'm not sure. They have a list of the parashah, haftarah readings every week. They also work in holiday readings, and they also work in the Brit Hadashah, the New Testament readings as well. I don't think it matches Goulder's suggestions, but it does put in the New Testament readings. And then Chabad.org. Chabad.org is always going to have your holiday readings. It's also going to have your I know it's on there. I've never used it, but I guarantee you Chabad.org has the parashah and haftarah portions for the week and everything else. Sefaria app. The Sefaria app on my phone, when I open up the Sefaria app on my phone, it has the parashah haftarah readings for that week. So they're all over the place if you want to use them. Where am I doing? Look at us. I'm just cooking with gas. Holy cow. If I get moving here, Brent's going to be cooking. Oh, there's Brent. Look at him.
I think you should just spell Chabad.
Chabad. C-H-A-B-A-D.
There it is.
I'm moving so fast, I'm overheating over here. I got to start shedding layers. C-H-A, looks like Chabad, but it's Chabad. C-H-A-B-A-D. and I believe it's .org. It's going to be your site for Orthodox Hasidic Judaism and Jewish practice. And it's what I use, it's what my family uses whenever we need. Our other favorite website is My Jewish Learning. And it will give us a lot of the materials that we need for holidays and recipes and festivals and all those things.
Whenever we've referenced any dates for Jewish holidays in like the Bema Messenger or anything like that, we're pulling those dates from Chabad.
That is correct. You got it. All right, I'm jumping down to Joanne. In episode 158, Marty talks about the statue of Artemis. Another Artemis question. Being taken down to the water to be cleansed and her virginity restored. However, Artemis is the goddess of chastity, among other things, and never lost her virginity. Could Marty have been mistaken, and the goddess he was talking about, Aphrodite, is the goddess of things sexual, not Artemis? I wonder if Paul's admonition for wives subject. Let me start with your first paragraph, Joanne. That is generally true. It's not completely true. Artemis was, the statue we found in Ephesus is not of Artemis the hunter, but Artemis the many-breasted one. There's great debate over whether or not they're breasts or whether or not they're testicles. Either way, very sexual image. So Artemis in Rome, in Asia, and then Asia Minor. Artemis was often in Roman mythology the goddess of hunting. And you're right, totally. As you described, that's the dominant image that when you do a lot of historical study and Roman mythology, that's what you're going to find. But in the biblical world of Asia and Asia Minor, Artemis was syncretized with Kibbalah of the Hittite Empire. So in Sardis, there's a temple to Kibbalah. That temple will become a temple to Artemis, not Aphrodite. Aphrodite is going to be a whole other part. It's going to be West. It's going to be Greco. It's going to be more Greco. It's going to be more West. And Aphrodite is going to be the god of sexual love. Artemis is going to be the goddess of sexual fertility, synced up with Kibbalah. So the thing about Greco-Roman gods and the Greco-Roman god system is that as Rome took over more and more parts of the world, what they did was they took local regional god worship and they just syncretized it with Roman gods. They pulled those things together and they synced them together. So yes, Artemis is typically the goddess of hunting, but in the biblical world of relevance, because Ephesus is certainly pretty relevant to the biblical world, in Sardis, in the world, the biblical world of Asia, biblical Asia and biblical Asia Minor, Artemis was connected to fertility. Not exclusively, but dominantly, because it was almost always pulled from the cult of Kibbalah, which you spell Kibbalah, by the way, Cybele. Cybele, Kibbalah. And Artemis was synced up with Kibbalah in that part of the world. So she was very much, and you can look up the statue of Artemis in Ephesus, from the Artemision temple in Ephesus. It will not be a hunter. Let's do a Google search on that. It will not be the hunter. The statue we found from the Artemision temple is definitely a sexual image. So there is some debate about what you're looking at when you're looking at her. Again, most of it is it breasts or is it testicles? There's even been some other suggestions as well. But based on the Kibbalah syncing up with Kibbalah and all those things, most scholars, I feel like the majority scholar opinion is we're dealing with, we even found references to Artemis, the many-breasted one. It doesn't have anything to do with hunting. So typically the case, but not, unfortunately in this one, not a mistake on my part. Marty was not mistaken this time. Aphrodite, also a god of sexuality, but not the same. And you didn't take Aphrodite's statue down to the harbor and wash it, and Aphrodite didn't have a pagan cult of perpetual virginity and all those things. That was not the case. And in fact, this is going to play out actually a big part of Christian history. Speaking of Mary, it will be the Council of Ephesus that ends up making the decision to venerate Mary in church history, the Council of Ephesus. Why is that relevant? Because Ephesus is the city of Artemis, the goddess of perpetual virginity. I'm not trying to say that Catholicism is engaging in pagan idolatry or syncretism. I'm just saying that's more than coincidental. Second part of your question, if I wonder if Paul's admonition for wives to submit to their husbands comes from the disdain that the women of Artemis held towards all men. Yes. To that, I would say yes. The new Roman woman was a very prominent opinion in Ephesus. That would certainly tell a different story to the world, submitting to your husbands. Then to combat the husbands getting big heads themselves, Paul tells them to love their wives like Christ loves the church. You get it. You get it. That was the point, Joanne, that I was trying to make in that episode. So you totally get it, and I'm here for it. But that's my take on Artemis. Okay. Again, I'd recommend that same source I recommended earlier. Roland Worth, 2 volumes, 7 Churches of the Apocalypse and Greco-Asian Culture and Greco-Roman Culture. 2 books. 2 books. Becky Gill. Oh, I'm trying not to say last names, everybody. I'm trying not to call people out. Becky. She says, we've been meeting consistently on a weekly basis and the group is going well. We had a question last week. In episode 6, you and Marty discussed a chiasm with an NBLH pattern, the consonants that are being used. Nun, Beit, Lamed, Hey. Is there more to it than the idea of being scattered? A few people felt as though they were missing something with respect to the actual consonants. So the consonants aren't connecting you to the theme. The consonants are the only connection to the consonants is it forms the chiasm. So the consonants all work. The same 4 consonants show up in the whole thing in the same order. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then you get to the center and it starts going 4, 2, 3, 1, 4, 2, 3, 1, 4. That's crazily, that's not coincidental. That has to be intentional, inspired, however you want to phrase that. So you have, that's the consonants. The consonants aren't trying to illuminate meaning. It just forms the chiasm. The center of the chiasm is the idea of being scattered. And Foreman's take on that is that it's our division. What God's trying to do is he's trying to scatter us so that we have to work together to get back to a place of unity. Because only if we learn how to speak each other's language will we ever find our way. I phrase it later in session 6. That's the only way back to Eden. The only way we're ever going to find our way back to Eden is to learn how to speak each other's languages. That's why God scattered. He wasn't punishing us in the Tower of Babel. It wasn't a punishment. God was simply saying they're cooperating in unproductive ways. I'm going to make them have to learn how to work together in productive ways in order to cooperate. And that's Foreman's point. And that's why the point of scattering is the center of the chiasm, because God has scattered us. He's split us apart, not because he wants us to stay that way forever, but maybe the exact opposite. God wants us to come back together. But the only way we'll do that is if we have the self-sacrificial posture that's required for me to learn somebody else's language, literally, but more important, metaphorically. I can't learn somebody else's perspective. I can't learn somebody else's paradigm. I can't learn somebody else's figurative language unless I'm willing to shut up, submit myself to a posture of a student, and learn from them. And when I choose to do that with my enemies, when I choose to do that with all of those people, well, we will have found the road back to Eden. We're a long way away today, aren't we? We're a long way away from the road back to Eden because we disagree about everything and we cancel everybody over the slightest little things. And when we're just all wanting to make sure that you're on my team, we got a long way to go to learn how to speak other people's languages. So that's the big idea there. Foreman does a much better job teaching it. I would recommend finding Foreman's teaching on Aleph Beta on the Tower of Babel and going from there. All right, Allison says this, in going through the John series, it occurred to me that the Jewish leaders or crowd often went to stone him. Jesus, the woman caught in adultery, Stephen. Often this was in the temple area, but sometimes in other places. Were there always stones around for just this purpose, or did people have to go off and find them? I can't imagine the keepers of the temple courts allowed rubble to stay around, messing up the area. So this was a natural occurrence, the presence of stones, or were they there on purpose just in case they were needed? I'm not aware of there being a bunch of stones there for the purpose of stoning. You wouldn't have stoned people on the Temple Mount. So really, I think your question is revolving around the temple area. And you would not have stoned somebody on the Temple Mount because that is a holy, sacred space. And if you were to kill somebody there, that would be big time bad news, right? Because that's going to make that whole area, dead bodies, make something really unclean. So I would assume you're outside the temple area. And at that point, stones are going to be far more readily available and plentiful. The other thing I would add is a lot of these cases where these are set up. So if they didn't have stones close by, they had brought them and they were ready. The woman caught in adultery is an absolute setup. So they came ready. They came ready to stone somebody. Jesus is usually being trapped. Sometimes, like in Nazareth, it's a reaction, but sometimes it's a trap. They're ready. So these are premeditated, would be my point. And the question's still a good one. It's a good practical question. But I think in a lot of these situations, A, you're not going to be on the Temple Mount. You're going to be places where there are going to be stones. And B, people are ready to get their stoning on. Like this is a premeditated setup. So they come ready. In a lot of them. Let's see here. Jesse says, what are your thoughts about Mary having other children after Jesus? Did she? Was she a perpetual virgin? Does it matter? I don't think it matters as far as the gospel goes. I see it as a distraction. However, some say the context and translation of Jesus's brothers mentioned in Scripture are actually just cousins. What are your thoughts? Thanks. Well, I do actually make the case that a lot of times those references, they can be that for sure. Brother, the term brother can absolutely just be a reference to kin. I think the James that writes the book of James is a cousin. I don't think it's the brother of Jesus. I think I think it's James, son of Alphaeus, who's a cousin to Jesus. So he is a brother, but that term brother doesn't mean brother. It can mean brother, but it's any relative. It's any horizontal relative. So father can be any vertical predecessor. It can be my father, it can be my grandfather, it can be my great-great-great-grandfather. Those are all fathers, my fathers. Brothers are all horizontal. Sisters, horizontal relationships, can be cousins, nieces, nephews. Those are brothers and sisters. I personally believe that Jesus I'm not a big expert on the doctrine of Mary's perpetual virginity. I know it's important to Catholics. I have no bone to pick there. I have no reason to. I don't necessarily understand the doctrine. I don't hold it. I assume that Jesus had brothers, but linguistically, there's enough room that if I'm wrong, like I won't necessarily lose any sleep over. I read the text to suggest and insinuate that he had brothers, but I'm thinking about it, and I don't know if there's any of those references that couldn't be read the other way. I don't know. I'm not wound up about the perpetual virginity of Mary either. But again, I don't disrespect the idea either. I've learned a lot from my Catholic brothers and sisters. I'll say it again tonight. I've made everybody mad. Might as well keep on making people mad. I'm just kidding. Hopefully nobody's getting mad. But yeah, there you go. I don't know. Good question. Questions are good. Todd says this: I'm a new listener to Bema. Had so many questions for decades and a hunger to go deeper. These lessons have been answered, a longing for more of God's revelation. Thank you. I was thinking about Numbers 20, when Moses strikes the rock twice, and Marty's belief that Moses' sin that day culminated in the killing of 2 people is what barred him from the promised land. I hear an echo of Cain after his murder of Abel. Then Cain went out from the Lord's presence and lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden. I love that. I love that, Todd. Because it helps kind of back up my take, which I don't necessarily hold. Like, it's been a long time. It's been a handful of years since I taught that in session 1. Josh Basse, one of those new teachers that I was telling everybody about at the beginning of the live stream, he ended up teaching. We came back in session 6, and we taught a lesson. I think it was actually, was it Josh's first episode? It was either his first or second episode. But we taught on that lesson. And I think his take, I liked his take far more. I was like, ooh, that's a better teaching. That should be Bema's new teaching, not Marty's crazy theory about Numbers 20. So you should go listen to that. I'll give you a hall pass, Todd. You're a new listener. I'll give you if Brent can find that episode, I will give you a hall pass to listen to that episode, because it was a good one. It was a doozy, and was a good take. But having said all that, I love what you've done here. You've gone, and you say you're a new listener, Todd. You're a new listener, and you're already thinking about the text in the text. You're thinking about textual connections. You're thinking about callbacks. You're seeing parallels. Ooh, Todd, if you're a new listener, you cooking with gas, son. This is great. I love it. I love it, because he lives east of Eden. Where does Moses have to stay when he gets barred from the promised land? But east of Canaan is where he's going to die. I love where your head's at. I love how you're thinking. I love how it works. I love that it backs up my theory. I love it. Love it, Todd. Great. I see Brent's face.
I was looking at something. I didn't hear what you asked me to find. Which episode am I looking for?
The episode where Josh talked about striking the rock. I think it was his first. It was either his first or his second episode.
Yeah, I do believe it was the first. Striking the Rock, episode 233.
Episode 233. You get one hall pass, Todd. I don't give many hall passes out. I'll give you one hall pass to skip ahead. Listen to that one episode. Only that one. And then you got to go back. Okay? That's it. And I love how you ended that email with just a thought. That's a great thought. It's a great thought, Todd. Okay, David. David said, I had a question concerning some of your teaching on the live stream last night. This was a reference to a couple weeks ago in November. End of November. I've thought about what you said about our faith being anchored to the person of Christ and not to history, theology, even to our own web of belief, that our allegiance is in, and faith is in God alone. One of the tough things for me that has left me leaving Christianity behind within the past few months is whether or not things happened in the past. For example, did Jesus rise from the dead, and did he ascend into the skies, or to govern as king? And to me, most importantly, whether there will be a real physical return of the body and self to earth to reign in a new kingdom. And I know there can be nuances to what this all looks like and a stretching of theological categories to be open to how that might happen, going towards your point of not being anchored to what we think will happen. But there still seems to be the core messages anchored to whether something did or didn't happen and will or will not happen in the future. Because if he didn't rise, and the writers of the New Testament rightly wrote or made up his statements regarding returning, who Jesus claims to be and the story he's telling us is the truth of the universe seems to come down to those events happening or not happening. After finishing my bachelor's and listening to all of Bema, being involved in working in ministry, listening to several teachers add their voice, being open-minded, and even wanting to believe, I still find myself doubting the events. Well, with reading and listening to Candida Moss and Robin Walsh, alongside multiple other scholars examining the data and every side of the conversation I can get my hands on, it still seems more implausible that the actual events took place. So to put it succinctly, is there a Christian faith without the events actually happening? And how do I know the relationship I thought I had with the person of Jesus wasn't as a result of my own consciousness doing mysterious things rather than a God doing mysterious things? I trust you so much and want to believe, but I haven't found answers that make sense. Was hoping you could help. All right, David. Good question. Big, long question with lots of good elements. L. Grover Fricks is going to speak to some of these things about the historicity of Jesus in the next live stream Q&A in January. So come back and stay tuned for that. But I wanted to speak to a couple of these things in your particular question. For me, so one of the things that I think we anchor our faith to inappropriately, the way that we've talked about the Christian faith in the last 100 years, the way we've tied it to apologetics and kind of proving this and proving this and proving this, has heightened this awareness of like, well, the historicity of this is super important then. And what I found, this isn't true of what you're describing to me, but for a lot of Christians, one of the things we've anchored our faith to is historicity. Like when we talk about the inspiration of the Bible, half the time what we mean when we say, well, the Bible's inspired, what we really mean by that is not that the Bible comes from God, which is what the word means. What we mean is that it well, the Bible's inspired. What we mean is it actually happened. So we're talking about history. So we're not talking about God. We're not talking about the authority of Scripture. We're not talking about the origin of Scripture. We're not talking about the source. We're talking about history, which means we're putting our faith in history. So the same thing that we talked about earlier. Now, that's not to critique where you're at. It's just to say that a lot of Christianity has built a world that points you in that direction, and it might not necessarily be helpful. Now, having said that, I've gotten to a place where, I don't know if people have noticed, I'm super comfortable questioning the historicity of stuff. I'm totally fine going like, yeah, that probably didn't happen. Yeah, that probably didn't happen. I don't know if that's real history or if that's an embellished story. I can make those leaps pretty easily just because of the time I've spent in textual criticism and those kind of things. It's not that important to me. Having said that, again, I'm amazed at how much history. I mean, I lead trips over to Israel and Turkey all the time. There is a lot of historicity behind this stuff. A lot. This stuff is real history. We can debate about how much of that stuff is real history and some of these outlandish stories and all. Yeah. But this story is not fantasy. This story is not made up. This story is not fairy tale. This story is history, rooted in history. Now, we can talk about the nuances and the details quite a bit. For me, one of the things that you brought up that's super important is the resurrection. For me, a bodily, literal, physical resurrection is a big deal exactly because of what you bring up here. Exactly because of what Paul says. If Jesus didn't rise from the dead, this whole faith is in vain. So a literal, physical, bodily resurrection of Jesus is a big one for me. And that's not popular in liberal scholarship for people to hold on to. I wouldn't call myself a liberal scholar anyway. I love to read liberal scholarship. I love to engage in the work of textual criticism. It's not where I would identify myself landing. Academically, it's not going to be super popular academically for people to be like, yeah, I believe in the literal resurrection of Jesus for obvious reasons. But I do. For a lot of the reasons that you list here. That part is important to me. So that's me going, actually, there's a lot of historicity here that I cling to, and I still have a lot of room to go. Yeah, but maybe not that and that. Yeah, of course. And that. Okay. I have a lot of room there, but I generally lean towards and look towards more historicity rather than less. And yet, your question that I thought was very well stated, David, was, is there a Christian faith without the events actually happening? I suppose there are some events that are more important than others. I'll classify it like the resurrection. Is there still a Christian faith without the resurrection? I think I could say yes. I don't really want to believe that at all. For me, that's a pretty hard line that I draw in the sand for me. A literal resurrection. There's a literal Jesus. Those are literal characters. These things literally happen in literal time and space. We can talk about those things and see those things and validate a lot of those things. But if a lot of those actual events, is there still a Christian faith? The answer is yes. I mean, I could even go far enough to say, like, if Marcus Borg and John Dominic Crossan are right, if a lot of these liberal scholars are right, and even if there wasn't some of those other, I think there still is a Christian faith. And that gets at two things that I find to be really important. Number one is this. We are not Christians because something happened. We're Christians because Jesus taught us the best way to live. And no matter what you do with all the extraneous, like, I'm not using language well today. Whatever you do with all those extracurriculars, this is still the best way to live, in my opinion. Not the way Christians have lived it out, but the way that Jesus invited us to live is still the best way to live that we've ever found in human history, in my opinion. Some would disagree with that. I don't. I agree with myself. But the last thing I would say is this. I also cling to my faith because Jesus, the person of Jesus, is very real to me. I'm not talking about the historical Jesus. I'm talking about I have had experiences. I know Jesus. I spend time with him every day. He is real to me, and he has talked to me and shaped me and given me, like, hope is born because of the person of Jesus, who is alive and living. I don't know how to make that sound academic or smart. I can promise you, and I can tell you, that is a reality in my life, and that is where hope comes from. That's why I'm able to forgive my enemies. I would also argue that even though it sounds like to me, David, your head probably gets in the way, probably not all your faults, probably a bunch of other stuff that even has made it that way, and your head's going to get in your way, your head's going to get in your way. I would almost guarantee you that if you got through all the crap and the garbage and the intellectual questions, which are all important, I'm not saying to throw them away. I'm just saying if you were to dig underneath for just a moment, underneath all of that, you would know that there's a truth. There's a truth underneath that is so true. And you don't even know what to call it. And I would call it the Christ. Like this thing where you know the transcendent love of God is a reality. Jonathan Martin says this in Prototype. Jonathan Martin says, I believe that there's a time, like every single one of us can remember a time when we were a little kid, whether we were a Christian or not, or whether we knew anything about God, or like we can remember a time, if we go back in our children's psyche long enough, where we just knew, because we didn't know any better. We just knew fundamentally that we were loved. That goodness was the center of the universe. And somewhere later that got beat out of us and we all grew up and whatever. I believe if you dig down far enough, and maybe you're like, that's not true for me. I don't know. I think for every single one of us, you dig down far enough, you get down underneath there. And sometimes we don't, because it's full of hurt and pain and trauma and baggage. And we got to have a counselor and a therapist help us get there. But I believe that underneath it all is Christ. And that matters more than theology. The Christ, the resurrected Christ, Jesus, the person of Jesus, the love of God incarnate in your life matters more than did Jonah get swallowed by a fish? Like that reality, the real person of Jesus matters more than did this stuff really happen. Now, once we get done thinking about that, we can go back to asking all the questions about whether or not this stuff happened, because those are good questions. They matter. So then we can go back to piling all those other layers back on top. But I don't cling to my faith because all of those answers to all those questions are yes. I cling to my faith because I have experienced the person of Jesus. I've had great mentors that taught me how to hear his voice, how to tap into his wisdom, how to trust in his teachings, not in history, but in reality, and that is where I find my faith. All right. Brent says time's up, but guess what, everybody? I'm in charge. This person says, I'm currently on episode 13. Based on your explanation in the introductory lesson, I expected to learn different material than I have known for the last 25 years as a Christian. I've been studying Torah with my cousin who converted to Judaism over 20 years ago, and I'm finding that your analysis of scripture doesn't match what I learned from her. How should I reconcile this? That is a great question. I would just try to do this quickly by saying Judaism is the same as Christianity. So imagine learning about Christianity from a Pentecostal pastor. That's where you came to faith. And then you learn about stuff, and then you start studying the Bible with a Catholic. You would be like, whoa, these things do not match up. These things are different. Judaism has different perspectives. Judaism has different expressions. Judaism has different sects. Judaism has different theologies. And I don't know if your cousin converted to Judaism. I don't know if they might be, like, how deep into teaching and learning and Talmud they might be. Because then there's like the stuff that we learn, but then there's the people that are familiar with how Talmud works and where it's going, and And so they might say, this is what I want to teach. This is the wisdom of the rabbi that I follow. And they might say, yeah, that thing that you're learning over there, yeah, that's over there. That's not what we do, but that's over there. They might acknowledge that. Maybe they don't. I mean, I'm learning this stuff straight from an Orthodox rabbi, a lot of these things that I'm sharing, right? So Rabbi Foreman, he's not a follower of Jesus. So he's not influenced by Jesus, and he's coming from a pretty Orthodox, standard, Talmud-driven perspective. But that doesn't mean that every Jew everywhere is teaching the same thing, just like the same way that you're finding all kinds of different stuff in Christianity. Now, I'd also add one final thing, and that would be this. A lot of Judaism today, one of the reasons that I like Foreman is that Foreman is focused on the text itself, the biblical text, what we would call the biblical text, while most rabbinical Judaism is always going to be focused, their center of gravity is on Talmud, oral tradition, teachings of the rabbis. And that's what their conversation is. It's all going to be rooted in Talmud and Jewish wisdom and all that stuff, which comes out of Scripture, but it's not going to be focused on Scripture. And the reason I like Foreman is Foreman does kick against the Jewish status quo in that he doesn't start with tradition and then talk about the Bible. He starts with the Bible, and it's informed by tradition. It's informed by tradition, but the conversation is really Bible-centric. And that's why I think it fits so well with those of us Jesus followers. We're Bible-centric people. That is unusual. And so in a lot of ways, the conversation you might have with a typical Orthodox Jew, Reformed Jew, conservative Jew, and again, there's different sects. Like, I don't know if your cousin Reformed Judaism, traditional Judaism, Orthodox, Hasidic, Lubavitch. Like there's so many different expressions that could very much taint those conversations. But Judaism is not a monolith. And that's a good thing. And you're going to learn things from your cousin that are going to be full of Jewish wisdom and full of wonderful stuff. And I would argue, I would imagine, that the things you're learning through Bema are at least helping you think. It might not be the same exegetical conclusions. It might not be the same essence of where we're going and what we're saying, but you're learning how to think like a Jew and interact with the text and ask a different set of questions. Those are the things that might be maybe more helpful at the end of the day. But those conversations with your cousin will be, I'm sure, full of wonderful wisdom, even though it doesn't align with Bema's curriculum. Bema is only one voice. We're telling the narrative in a particular way. And Judaism is this big, huge, wide stream. And they've told lots of different stories in lots of different ways, just like Christianity. So last one. This is it. I am a young adult who is married and working in the field of engineering. I have been struggling deeply with my sense of purpose. I feel like I work for the empire. All I do is meet deadlines and budgets, watch customers get taken advantage of, see coworkers make personal and moral sacrifices to get ahead in the office. This has been shocking to me since entering the workforce. I know I can be a light to those whom I work with, but I just don't know what to do when it feels like the actual work I do is all for money and power. I have heard Marty mention a few times on the podcast how Impact Campus Ministries equips students to have purpose in their own prospective professional fields. Are there any resources or nuggets of wisdom that can help me? I know that there will be, Lucan. I know that there will be. I don't have a list ready for you right now. We're trying to create some resources at Impact because there are some great vocational resources that come from a Reformed theological slant, and that's great. I don't have a problem with Reformed theology. But what we're trying to do and what we're trying to talk about, and what I think is helpful for your question, is not the Reformed theological take on vocation. Tim Keller wrote some great stuff. It's beautiful. It's gorgeous. I just signed up this last week. I got accepted this week to go to Xavier University. I got accepted into the grad program. And what I'm doing is trying to study Ignatian spirituality because I think the Catholic perspective and tradition has something unique that Protestant Reformation theology doesn't have when it comes to vocation. This is a long way of me saying, Lucan, I'm trying to learn about this because I want to create some of these resources. I want to find some of these resources. I do want to share some of these resources. And I know that there are some out there. People have recommended stuff to me. I just haven't spent time with them to where I intimately know them in my own stream of consciousness where I can regurgitate them and tell them to you. I have work to do because I want to be able to answer this question. But this is fundamentally what we believe with Impact. I will say this poetically, without a bunch of resources, without a resource list, I will say this. Whatever work you do, and I don't know what work you do and what your office is like and what people in your office are doing, but whatever work you do is about taking creation and properly ordering and stewarding it. And you may not be in charge of the company. and the company is in it for money, and the company is in it to build empires. We would expect that. That's how the world operates. We would expect the world, hey, I love Brent Billings. He was like, we do know what he does. It's engineering, knucklehead. Read the question. I love that. You're an engineer. And your company, it's imperial. We would come to expect that. The secular world's going to have those kind of bents, right? They're going to be going for that in that direction. That doesn't necessarily surprise us. But you, like an engineer, literally takes God's creation and you order and you steward it. You take, whether it's raw materials or designs or creative ideas, and you take creation, you order it and steward it, and you either bring more shalom, and you're frustrated because your company doesn't value some of those things, and they might be abusing the earth and wasting materials and resources, taking advantage of people, but you get to decide. So you're not in charge of the whole thing, but you've been given a little plot of dirt, a little plot of earth. And you're going to be able to bring shalom to those people and the people that work with you, around you, under you. You can control what happens in your field. Now you have to be careful. You have to use a lot of shrewd wisdom. This is where the book of Esther is so just, get Foreman's book, The Queen You Thought You Knew, and consider Esther's wisdom, because she has to get into the middle of this, and she has to figure out how to shrewdly. She can't just come in and like plant her flag and say, this is where I stand and I'm here for shalom and you guys are idiots, because then no shalom will be brought. She'll just be kicked out. The plan will fail. She has to figure out, how do I shrewdly, Walter Brueggemann will call this accommodate resistance. How do you accommodate the world that you live in just enough that you can stay there and simultaneously resist it? Not in a way that gets you fired, not in a way that calls people in. It's like attractive, in a way that like says, I can do this job for less money. I can treat people better. I can take care of more people. How can I? It's going to take some wisdom. It's going to take some shrewdness. But now all of a sudden I can go to work and I can be like, I'm bringing order to some chaos. I'm impacting a company. I'm changing the life of the people that I rub shoulders with. And the physical work that I do, the engineering that I do, it's a step above. It's a step above. Like everybody's doing like this level of engineering. It's good. But I'm adding a shine, I'm adding a polish, I'm adding some shalom, and my engineering is right here. Not because I'm trying to be better than them. That's worldly. That's like worldly competition. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about bringing more shalom, more goodness. Live such good lives among the pagans, Peter says, that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they see your good deeds, and they can't deny the goodness. So how can we do our jobs? That's probably going to be a long game. That's a long game, Lucan. It's not going to happen by Wednesday, right? That's not going to happen next month by the end of the year. This is going to be like stuff you're going to work on for months and years. You're going to shrewdly look at what's a little change, what's a little change that I can make that's going to make a big difference. Now my job becomes like this little strategic, little accommodation resistance plot. And I mean that in a good way. I don't mean that in some crazy subversive burn the thing down way. I mean like, how can goodness. Everybody wants goodness. Empire bows at the feet of goodness, shalom. It's always true. So anyway, those are some thoughts. I want to have more things to say. In the next year or two, I want to have more things to say. That was just my poetic response for now, tonight. Because that, Lucan, I put that question at the end. That was the question. That is the question. That's the question I want to be good at. That is what Impact is doing. That, you got it. You got it. Like you didn't realize you got it, but that is it. That is the Impact Campus Ministry question. That is what keeps me up vocationally at night. This is what I'm working on. That question, I just haven't made it very far yet. So stay tuned, because I like that question. All right. I'm only 15 minutes late. Our next Q&A, January 10th, everybody. Elle Grover Fricks. I'll be here to introduce her, and then I'm getting out of here. And Elle Grover Fricks is going to do our live stream. If you don't know who Elle Grover Fricks is and you joined us late, you need to go back and watch the beginning of this live stream when it posts and hear all about who Elle Grover Fricks is. Who is she? Why is she going to be here? We'll talk all about that. So, Brent, that was pretty good.
I am late for dinner, but I don't think I'm going to starve, so it'll work out.
Man, I was that guy. And it was pretty good, but this was probably not my best Q&A. I probably had
I
some
have
spicy
people
little
in the
answers.
comments who would disagree with you.
That
I literally had someone say it was the best. I can't remember. I saw that comment scroll by.
usually is not a great indication, actually. It usually means I crossed some lines I should have. That's okay. Jesus is good. All right, everybody, we're all caught up. We'll be ready for January. Brent, you got anything to add before you go eat dinner?
Nope, that's it. We'll
Boom.
continue refining this process. We left, more questions on the floor again, as always. It's just gonna.
We'll get better. Now that we got
Yeah.
caught up, we're now caught up. That was my goal tonight. We made it. Brent, my light's still working. This is like a miracle. This is a Christmas miracle. I've gotten 6.5 hours of use out of this light. I can't believe it.
Yeah,
All right, everybody.
almost 8 hours of Hanukkah right there.
Ooh, I didn't even think about the parallel. I like it. All right, everybody. We'll see you in January. January 10th, we'll be back. We'll talk to you then.